Welcome to the Blue Yonder Overland podcast. I'm your main host, Jen, and I started this podcast to inspire and empower you to spend more time outside, however works for you, but especially to make overlanding more approachable. Each week, we provide practical advice for vehicle-based camping, either focused on a topic or featuring interviews with people who are doing it, sharing lessons learned and empowering you to spend more nights under the stars. If you're new to overlanding, I'd recommend starting with our first 2 episodes on why we love it and how to find campsites beyond the campground. As always, feel free to send us any questions you have at BlueYonderGen at Instagram or Threads, and hopefully we'll see you out in the wild Blue Yonder. Welcome back to Blue Yonder Overland for episode 8 of our podcast. Today we're going to be focused on camp cooking and how to make your life a little bit easier. And I am lucky enough to have my husband, Matt, joining us today as well.
Hello, everybody.
We are coming to you from a beautiful campsite in the Hearst San Simeon State Park in the Central Coast of California.
Yeah, it's an amazingly beautiful one. We did a nice drive this morning up the coast, and I think we're going to do a sunset drive tonight. Hopefully get some really beautiful views. I absolutely love the Central Coast of California.
And it's conveniently located near one of Matt's favorite wine areas.
Absolutely. Paso Robles, we drove through it on the way. Got to stop by my favorite winery, Lone Madrone. It's been an excellent trip so far.
And only one night down. So far, so good.
And we're only lugging 1 case of wine home with us.
So speaking of lugging things home, we are actually on our way home to Kingston, Washington from, a long trip, but we've most recently been at the Overland Expo SoCal down in Costa Mesa. This was the first year that they've done a Overland Expo in Southern California. Matt, how do you think it went? How was your impression of it?
It was an impressive show. Like a lot of the Overland Expos, really well run. Lots of great exhibitors and vendors and just really, really cool builds. It was nice seeing it in Southern California and just how excited the market down in Southern California is for overlanding and dispersed camping and all the things that come with it. I was at the CampWorks booth. We were showing off the Robotios heliotrope, and it was awesome to just see how many people came by, not really being campers, but wanting to get into it.
Yeah, lots of good energy. I think for me, my highlight was the Women Who Wander networking event that was organized for Saturday morning. They did a fantastic job just introducing some really cool leaders and innovators in the overlanding space with both 4 wheels and 2 wheels, and got to hear stories of women who not only have been overlanding everywhere imaginable, but in every way imaginable, and then also get to hear examples of how they're building businesses or building community in really cool ways. So that was really cool. Found a bunch of people to follow, a bunch of different get-togethers or camps or trainers that I want to check out. So that was really, really cool. And then also was lucky enough to secure a couple of future podcast interviews with some of these ladies. So very excited for that coming up. To set the stage for today's topic, we're going to be discussing camp cooking, and my vision for this is kind of like I laid out in the first couple episodes, really wanting to break down any barriers to you getting outside camping more, however that looks for you, backpacking, car camping, overlanding, moto camping, however. And we kind of covered the basics of what you would need to get started overlanding in our 3rd episode, and we referenced cooking gear, but we didn't really go in depth because I knew that we could unpack that for an entire episode. So today is that episode to really dive into details on cooking gear, cooking prep, ways you can make your life easier just by how you store things or think about things ahead of time and what to do with leftovers, and then sharing some of just our favorite tips and any meals. So without further ado, let's get this show on the road. So we're going to start today by talking about basic camp cooking setups, especially the pros and cons, because whatever your cooking equipment is definitely going to influence what you want to cook and what you can cook. And
Yes.
Matt has tried pretty much every setup imaginable. So I'd love to hear what you think is like the bare bones, like this is a serviceable setup and it's the most minimal, simple one you can do. And then what's your personal favorite?
Yeah. So, on the bare bone setup, it's just going to be a single burner. I like sort of the butane style versions of it. Ideally, something that is sturdy enough to hold a large pot. Because if you are going with a single burner, you're going to be more limited to sort of one pot style meals, which if you're cooking for 2 or more people will require a larger pot.
Makes sense.
But, if I had to make a recommendation when it comes to cooking, and this is if you like to cook at all, I would definitely go this way, start with a minimum of 2 burners. When you're looking for a specific setup, the things you really want to look for are not just power, but control of the flame. So, there's in certain situations, there's things to think about around fuel and fuel type. I think in most cases, that's not really important. But going with something like the Jetboil 2-burner system that they have that has a really fine level of control, what you'll find with a lot of camp cooking stoves is they're basically off or they're burning everything, and there's not a great middle ground.
Okay.
So definitely going with something and looking for level of control when you look through reviews of products. And like I said, the Jetboil system that they've got, I think is my favorite of the 2 burners on the market.
Okay. Yeah. And they have multiple different pots or pans that you can kind of sub out on top of it, include in their system, that are interchangeable.
Yeah, that's an important note. I'm not talking about sort of the Jetboil canister backpacks or stoves, excuse me. I'm talking they have, legit burner for car camping style stuff. And yeah, then you could use any pot or pan. And there's a lot to be said about pots and pans as well. And I think we'll go into that a little later.
Okay, sounds good. In terms of covering all of the types of camp cook stoves available, I got to meet Amanda Zito at the Overland Expo. She was in the content creator area and traveling with her motorcycle, and so had her full setup on display, and also was selling copies of her motorcycle camp cookbook. And she has an illustrated section going through pretty much every type of camp stove available, as well as the pros and cons. It's really awesome if you want a comprehensive look at things. And she's experimented with all of them. So talks about things like windscreens or the types of fuel and all of that. But she pretty much, it's funny, she pretty much agrees with your assessment, Matt, on thinking about the level of control you have about controlling that flame. Because if it's just either all or nothing, it makes it really hard to cook. So,
yep.
If you want to go more in depth, highly recommend checking out her cookbook or any of her resources online. I'm betting she has some of this in some of her online content as well.
She's also has some great recipes in there. Simple stuff that's easy to cook outside, but sort of elevates your camping experience.
Yeah. And as a little side note, I find motorcycle camping advice awesome for so many situations, because if you go and look at what the motorcycle campers are doing, you're going to find pretty much the simplest setups, but also they've really gone through the trouble usually of figuring out how to maximize their comfort and enjoyment out of them. So I, especially on the cooking side, like they don't have a lot of space to carry, but they've really done well with the limited space that they have. So I think, and that might be the other thing to mention then, is in addition to just cooking setups, then sort of the surrounding setups that you might also want to be thinking about. And usually that's some way of keeping food cool?
Yep. When I think about cooking, I always approach it from the same general concept. How am I going to cook it? Where am I getting my food from? Where is it being stored? And what tools do I need to execute what I'm cooking? So for us, that typically looks like a fridge freezer, some sort of cooking device. I have definitely gone through a lot of different ones, and they all have their pros and cons and sort of meals that they're better for, and a good set of pot and pans, and then utensils and spices.
So I said I would circle back and also ask you your favorite cooking setup. You've talked about kind of the bare minimum and one that's very versatile and works well. But your favorite?
Yeah, my favorite is probably one of the more excessive ones, and that was bringing the Traeger portable smoker along with.
Yes.
Doing that, particularly in the summer where there's great fruit. We did steak sandwiches on it with peaches and Manchego cheese, and it was fantastic.
Yeah, it was.
A
little bit of balsamic drizzles on there.
Yeah, and I just really enjoyed sort of the experience of cooking with that. You know, smoking meat is a longer process, and so it sort of was just a fun thing for me to sit outside and do that in this beautiful spot with that. That being said, that thing's absolutely massive and heavy, and if it weren't for the delicious food, it wouldn't be worth it. And I think I will only bring a setup like that on special occasions when we're camping with friends. I have to do a larger amount of cooking, or I should say I get to do a larger amount of cooking for people, and I happen to have space in the vehicle.
Yeah, and it helps if you're bringing along friends who will really appreciate the effort that went into a unique meal. So it just makes it extra fun then to try something really outlandish and creative.
Definitely.
Awesome. So that should get you started with how to think about your basic setup in terms of how to actually cook the food. Storing food, we, like Matt said, have a fridge freezer combo that does run on electrical power, so we always have it plugged into a battery system. But of course, you could just get started with a simple cooler. I think if you're car camping, there's not a lot of reason not to bring some sort of cooler, however simple it is.
Definitely. Yeah, how you approach the chilled foods will definitely impact your experience. I really prefer working from a fridge to a cooler. Some of the annoying things about a cooler that drove me nuts were it's all my food getting wet and just dealing with the excess moisture and everything as ice melts or the condensation and stuff like that. You just don't deal with those headaches with a fridge. It certainly comes with its other problems around, making sure you have electrical power and it's charging if you're out for a while, and dealing with thermal gradients within a fridge, particularly if you have it in a fridge freezer mode. But I have certainly done both. I think the fridge freezer, if you're camping frequently, more than a few times a year, is definitely worth the investment. We always have a very specific setup, or a common setup that I've used for pretty much the entire time I've been overlanding, which is the concept of I have my dry stores. So that's always a pretty consistent set of items that I just keep stocked in the truck. Things like pasta, rice, peanut butter, oatmeal, things that don't go bad, that I know no matter if I'm going to the grocery store, they exist in the truck and I don't have to buy those. I mean, I will restock after a trip, but just a constant set of staples. So if you and your family or whoever you're going out with like quinoa or, specific dry goods, just keep those in what we call our dry stores. And then you're really just dealing with the fresh and the perishables, and how you handle those. Like Jen said, we use fridge freezer. Oftentimes, if it's a short trip, we just have it fridge mode all the way across. If we're doing a longer trip like we're at now, it's nice to just have the meat and some things in the freezer so you can pull them out. Particularly fresh fruits and vegetables. I think if you're doing a longer trip, bring an immersion blender with you and some frozen fruit, some frozen vegetables. You can make smoothies. It's a lot easier to sort of eat healthy that way versus trying to deal with keeping the fresh fruits not frozen or not damaged, bruised, just with transit and stuff like that. It can be a pain in the butt.
Yeah, that's a good tip. Well, and also bringing a fridge freezer along, especially for a longer trip. I like how you prepped for this one is you made some meals or partial meals or sauces ahead of time and froze them. So then it made it really easy for our longer travel days, even on very long travel days where we knew we weren't going to have much time or energy for cooking in the evening. You could pull out a pre-made pasta sauce that you knew you loved already and put it over some fresh noodles. And that's a real quick, simple dinner. So the freezer really, expands your possibilities too.
Yeah, I think no matter what, when you're out camping and eating, there's sort of two large classes of meals. There's the I have time to cook meals and I don't have time to cook, or weather conditions don't permit cooking sort of meals. And so I'm a big fan of pre-prepping ahead of time. I mean, I love cooking outside, but sometimes it's too cold to cook outside.
Or too rainy
or anything like that. And just being able to know, okay, all I've got to do is warm up this and make some rice or make some noodles. It's definitely the way to go.
Okay. So then I want to kind of circle back to, you talked briefly about basic staples to have on hand for both gear, but also spices. So walk me through basic gear first.
Okay. Basic gear, obviously, besides your 2-burner, having a good set of pots and pans, which I'll say largely don't go to REI for your pots and pans. I mean, I'm really just talking about the most of things that are called camp cookware. They're light, they're flimsy, they don't have great nonstick, or they have no nonstick. Just staying away from stuff like that. Having a good set of pots and pans, something that's heavy, is actually really worth the spend. So we're using the OXO kit right now. I've enjoyed that has a carbon steel nonstick for its frying pans. It has a nice heavyweight stainless steel for its stock pot and saucepan. We've also used products by Magma, which also make a really nice heavy duty. They're sort of meant for the RV or boat industry. Invest in a good set of pots and pans.
And both of those they all pack within each other, kind of like Russian nesting dolls.
Yep. Yeah, you can definitely get some good pack. Like, you want to look for stuff that packs down and has removable handles or stuff like that. But a lot of the stuff out there is either not worth the money if you're paying for titanium and you're not backpacking, stuff like that, or is just, in my opinion, not great quality and terrible to cook with.
Okay, so that's pots and pans. And then knives, I know, are a big one for you.
Yep, definitely a good set of knives or a sharp set of knives. And you really just need 2 or 3 depending on what you're doing. I always carry around a bread knife, a good chef's knife, and a paring knife.
Okay.
Keep them sharp, keep them clean, and that'll work well. From there, when it comes to utensils, have a set of tongs, a good spatula, something that's stiff enough to sort of scrape stuff off the bottom of a pan, or stiff enough to flip with. If you do plan on cooking over fire, think through that and its length. I just tend to use one across everything, and then some sort of spoon.
Mm-hmm. And then we also usually have a small cutting board in our kit.
Yeah. Yeah, I think a lot of the pre-packed kits will come with one, and sometimes I use it, sometimes I don't.
Now we have a butcher block
Yeah,
pull-out kitchen, so it's less useful,
yeah,
but
yeah,
yeah.
definitely. But yeah, just something to chop on is nice. I think before we were in the NS1, I a lot of times used the cutting board that came from our serving tray thing from, now I can't remember the
Hydro
manufacturer.
Flask?
Hydro Flask. Yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
we have a little serving tray. It's sort of your standard kitchen cutting board, a little bit bigger. The ones that tend to come in the kits are smaller and just more annoying for me.
Yeah, we really loved some of the Hydro Flask equipment that came out in the last few years because it also had the bottom layer was did not allow heat transfer in their like bowls or trays, so you could put it right on your lap, but the food inside either the plate or the bowl or the tray could be kept at a different temperature, which was quite nice.
Yep. Yeah, you'll see, a lot of camp dishes are made of metal. It has a really good temperature conductivity. And so, if you put a hot dish into a metal bowl, suddenly the bottom of that bowl's hot. And, a lot of times you might have a table, sometimes you don't. And so we did, and I was really, really glad we did, is really come in handy a lot. We bought the sort of double insulated bowls from Hydro Flask, and they've been great. We have their plates, their bowls, and their serving boards, and I love all of them.
I think the bowls are definitely our favorite. They are so great for winter camping, putting hot chili or soup or stew or pasta in them. And then they have lids so you can bring it wherever you want to eat it if you want to take it back inside your tent or camper or wherever. And then you can also even keep leftovers in there and just stick it right in the fridge. So we use those bowls obsessively.
Yep. Definitely.
So yeah, that kind of walks through then I think all the cooking gear and even some of the serving gear.
Yeah, I would say, and outside of the cooking gear, things you want to make sure you have with you: large Ziploc bags, aluminum foil, paper towels, and some sort of wipe. And then some way of actually washing the dishes.
Yep. Well, and I talked about some of this in the Dirty Secrets of Overland.
Oh, that's true.
I shared that actually our dirty secret is that we often don't fully wash our dishes, and we use really powerful, I think they're called tough wipes, to give it just a quick rinse. It has like a soap built into the wipe to at least get all of the food residue off.
Yeah, and even before using that, we'll use a paper towel to wipe all the residue. Then you wipe with a wipe, and then you rinse, and it makes life a lot easier.
Yeah. If we don't want to go through, I mean, we also now have a nice, I think it's from OXO, a little dishwashing sink, but it also doubles as a dish storage system. Yep.
The OXO camping sink folds in or collapses into 3 nice pieces, but it gives you 2 sinks, one for washing, one for rinsing, and then a drying rack. Promise I'm not sponsored by OXO, but I do love a lot of their products, and that's one of them.
Okay. So then from all of the gear, let's change gears a little bit to thinking through sort of cooking essentials like spices and oils that you have on hand. I'm always really impressed with you have a little square zippered box of your spices and oils. So how did you decide what has earned a spot in that kit?
Yes. So there's the basics: oil, whether it's olive oil, some sort of seed oil, or just any your sort of preferred oil. Salt, pepper, and then based on your spice palette or the things you like to cook, that will round out the rest. I use a decent amount of garlic. If I can, I'll use it fresh, but I do have powdered garlic. I keep I would say a medium-sized container of that. Then sort of mixed seasonings that can be used widely across. So Italian seasoning, sort of a mixed chili powder type thing. And then I have created some of my own sort of mixed things that I like for eggs or for meat if it's going to be by itself, and they have things like cumin and oregano and stuff like that. So I would say, yeah, just bring the spices that you cook with most at home, where you can blend them together so that you don't have too many things to take apart, and then bring that. And with your spices, some of the things to consider are the containers you use, and not only their ability to stay closed, but to keep moisture out. So my salt container isn't great. It is, so I keep some noodles in there to keep it dry. But my other containers are, have a really nice tight seal on them, so that if we do go through humid environments, they don't get too clumpy.
Okay. So that covers the basics. And so you have those things on hand. Walk me through then you're heading into a weekend of camping, kind of how you might prep for it in terms of shopping or prep at home.
Yeah, this is one of the areas that I spend a lot of time planning. So, one, start with how many meals you're doing and who you're doing it with. So if we're going out, just Jen and I, that I will tend to be a little on the simpler side and okay with, just doing oatmeal for breakfast every day. But if I am going out with a group, I really like to show what camping and eating well really just multiplies the experience. And so having good meals. And so thinking through, okay, what meals am I cooking and how many of those are quick meals? How many of those are long meals? And how many of those are meals that will have other people? And then from there, just break down. I always start with dinner. Dinner, particularly your second night, is usually my biggest meal. And so I'm going to dedicate as much room as is needed for that meal. And then I work back to, we tend to do smaller on the lunch side. You're out hiking, you're out doing stuff. So then it's breakfasts. What space do I need in my setup for breakfast? Am I doing pancakes? Am I doing eggs? I've spent years mastering the breakfast taco, and I think I've finally nailed it. And so what stuff do I need to do breakfast tacos? And then fill in from around there. And so I just start with, okay, what am I cooking? What ingredients are needed? Do I have enough space for the ingredients? If no, what substitutions can I make? And then put together the packing list and go from there.
Okay. And then that would indicate what you needed to shop for as well.
Yep.
And then...
Yep. And like I said, usually I'm relying on some known dry goods. If I am cooking for larger groups or going out for a larger period, I'll think through that as well. But it's usually, okay, what type of meat do I need? What fresh produce do I need? Are there any spices that aren't in my kit that I will need? In which case I'll prep a little Ziploc baggie ahead of time for that. If there is fresh produce and stuff, how at risk is it for freezing? I almost never plan on making a salad because in 100 attempts of making a salad while camping, I haven't frozen my lettuce maybe twice or 3 times. So I don't tend to rely on salads, but if I'm bringing tomatoes, do I want to pre-chop them? Onions, pre-chop, not chop, depends. It just varies every time what sort of prep work is needed.
Okay. Just to do a little side tangent, what made you decide the breakfast taco is the ultimate breakfast, and why do you think you've perfected it? I ask this as somebody who very much enjoys your breakfast tacos, but I want the listeners to understand why you think it's the height of camp breakfasts.
So one of the great things about the breakfast taco, as far as camp breakfast goes, is the ability to eat it as you're going. It's a self-contained sort of thing. So usually if you're making breakfast, you're planning on doing something during that day. So I want it to be a filling, delicious meal, but I want it where people can come and go as needed as they're packing up or prepping for mountain biking or hiking or whatever we're going to do today. That, unlike pancakes or French toast, which I feel like require sitting down, they require forks, knives, they take up more pan space, all those sort of things. Breakfast tacos don't. So that's one. And two, I just think they're really delicious. Our friend Pam showed us how to make this amazing sauce out of a pepper called a chiltepe, which is also one of my favorite things in the world. And so a breakfast taco is a great thing to eat that on. And so I just sort of grew. And then between our friends Brad and Lauren, it's just what we have always done.
So you've just, over time, perfected it, especially with the chiltepe sauce.
Yes. So the trick to a good breakfast taco is, one, essentially make an open face quesadilla where you get the cheese actually crispy, and then some scrambled eggs. In my scrambled eggs, I like to use some garlic, some oregano, salt, and pepper. That makes up sort of my egg seasoning. And then some sort of meat, whether it's bacon or chorizo or sausage. And then, a hot sauce of some variety, ideally chiltepe.
Nice. My mouth is watering right now just thinking of those breakfast tacos.
I'm glad I ate lunch before this.
Okay, so we've talked through basic food staples, gear staples, spice staples. We haven't talked too much yet about storage, other than talking about our favorite bowls ever, which also double as storage for our leftovers. But one of the sessions I actually went to at Overland Expo this weekend was about food preparation and storage specifically for long adventures. She was very much focused on sort of multi-month overlanding adventures. This was by Connie Rodman. She had actually done an overland trip from London all the way to South Africa and had to try to plan for how to keep things in the fridge or cooler at that time for that long, and then supplementing with local markets on the way. And so not all of this was applicable to today's average weekend camper, and there's been a lot of advances in the refrigerator and camp gear since she did this trip back in about 2004. But she did have a couple of good takeaways, I thought, for food storage. One of the common pain points that I think everybody experiences if they're trying to do eggs is how to store eggs without breaking them. And we've tried a couple of different ways. Connie had found what I thought was a pretty ingenious solution. I think a lot of folks have seen the 6 or 12 packs of egg cases, essentially plastic cases you can keep raw or hard-boiled eggs in and kind of keep those safe. But she was annoyed by the fact that as she used them, the case still takes up the same amount of room. So if you're keeping that in the fridge, it's valuable fridge space that then is going to waste, especially if you're trying to restock with any fresh veggies or fresh produce on the way. So she found individual plastic Easter eggs, and you can, of course, get those in different sizes. Put a little bit of quilt batting or cotton in the bottom to act as padding, and then put the eggs in there. So each egg had its own individual protection, and she could keep them in the fridge that way. And so that was a pretty cool solution. I think for us, we generally will just pre-scramble our eggs a lot of the time and put them into whatever size. I think we often use a mason jar of different sizes because you can get those in different heights. Yep. So then depending on how many people we're going to have along, how many eggs we need to have along, we can kind of put it in a different size jar.
Yep. I almost never throw away jars. So either an actual mason jar or some leftover jar. I really like, it just depends on how many eggs we're doing.
Yeah. The other good tip from Connie's session at Overland Expo this last weekend was talking about easily crushed items. And this, I was like, taking note. For things like bread or chips, oftentimes I'll try to put those maybe at the top of we have a dry goods box that we'll use, either a hard or soft case. Or sometimes if we've done shopping last minute or on the road, it'll end up like those types of items might be at the top of a grocery bag or reusable bag that we're bringing along. But Connie uses an overhead netting in her food storage area for things like chips and bread. So it's just overhead, and then it can't be crushed. And I was like, that's genius. We should probably do that.
Yep. I love, even no matter how long you do it, you'll always find someone who does it better, does it in a different way. And when you can find those, it's a really great experience. So I'm looking forward. I've sort of written sandwiches off, and we use tortillas and wraps a lot because I got tired of crushed bread. But now I think bread might be re-entering the allowable ingredients list.
Nice. So, Matt, do you have any other, tips along those lines, either for storing things or dealing with leftovers?
Yeah, I mean, I will think about everything from the perspective of leftovers. So ideally, I'm cooking a meal that I have no planned leftovers for. But if you're doing a jar of sauce, if you're doing something like keep it, chances are that it will make a great leftovers dish. For example, we made pasta last night. I had a jar of spaghetti sauce. And we added some sausage and some peppers and some broccoli and stuff. And so by the time we were done eating it, all the leftovers filled that jar quite nicely. And so that works well.
On that note, and this is where I love how creative you've gotten, and it really opened my eyes to be a little bit more creative. But when you're thinking through reusing containers, you do not limit yourself to whatever the thing is sold in the grocery store with, or you will consider different brands and see how they have packaged things, and you might choose to buy, if you don't have time to go home and put it in whatever size or shape container you want, you'll very carefully consider at the grocery store how it's being sold. A perfect case in point is the pre-made pasta sauces, and Safeway is the common grocery store that we often find in the Washington area that we'll go to. Their store brand, or maybe it's their elevated
Safeway Reserve.
Safeway Reserve. They make a range of different sauces, including a very good arrabbiata sauce that we like to use as a base for stuff. And their glass jars that they come in are a perfect shape for storage because they're just one smooth, tall cylinder. They don't have any weird extra bulges or get wider at one point that make it hard to pack. They're just a smooth cylinder.
And they have a wide mouth.
Yes.
So, it's easy to load food back into them. And they store very nicely. That's a great point.
But I really liked that you paid attention to what sort of container the sauce came in. And if you can't find one that you like at the grocery store and we're doing the shopping ahead of time, you'll take it out of whatever container it was sold in and put it in something that fits our needs or fits the space better. And I loved that. It's like, okay, you don't need to be limited, whatever packaging it came in. Like, you can put it in whatever you want. And that's where things like some of the silicone storage, which is a little more flexible, we've experimented with that. We've experimented with the kind of a silicone flexible water bottle that actually worked pretty well for milk storage. Then as we used it, it could take up less space in the fridge, because we're often annoyed by that if we're trying to bring along milk for coffee or pancakes or other things. Yeah,
one of the things, I mean, milk is a great example. Milk, I have come to really like to put my milk into a vacuum lined double sealed container, like a really well insulated container, because one, it means I don't have to put it back in the fridge right away. So if we're having it out for coffee or breakfast or cooking, it's staying cold. And two, if my fridge does die for any reason, I don't have sour milk to deal with. It stays cool enough. So that's one. And you could also get those where they pack well, nice and straight. And that's a good one. The other thing is, thinking around soft-sided containers rather than like Tupperware containers. So we do just a lot of Ziploc bags and stuff like that. You pack your food in, it stores nicely, it can freeze, it can go in the fridge, and they're easy to pack. Yeah. And then same with things like aluminum foil.
Yeah. Well, and I think that also influences some of our food choices, like I was talking about with pasta sauce. Same with the pasta itself. And this is something Amanda Zito mentioned in her motorcycle cookbook too. But something like fettuccine or angel hair is a lot easier to pack than a bunch of elbow or bow tie, just because it takes for the bang for your buck, what you're getting for your meal is that that thin pasta. You can pack way more of it more efficiently. And then also it tends to cook faster than some of the sort of bulkier individual noodle types.
Yeah. Another good one is orzo. That's a lot of bang per buck.
Yep. Another interesting tip that Amanda talked about was measuring stuff. And we didn't talk about bringing measuring spoons or cups along. And that's because we generally don't. And so Amanda talks about practicing eyeballing any of the common measurements that you might need at home as you cook with things. But another thing we've done to avoid needing to bring measuring equipment is just pre-measure things and packing those maybe in their own small containers, like Matt mentioned, spice jars or small Ziplocs. Or like, for instance, we'll instead of buying the pre-seasoned packs of oatmeal that come in like a 10-pack at the grocery store, we'll just make our own oatmeal, but pre-season it in individual Ziplocs at home. So we don't have to bring all of those individual spices along with and then try and individualize it.
Yeah. I never measure anything when we're out camping. I mean, I don't really measure a lot of things when we're home either.
That's fair.
But yeah, if you're doing pancakes, just get the right, just add water, get the right texture. If you're same with things like French toasts, add your core ingredients and add milk until it feels right. And that's, But if you do have to measure something, so let's say I'm making pizza dough or something like that, then I will weigh it out and measure it ahead of time and just keep it in its own packaged container.
Okay, so I think we're already then kind of segueing into just favorite tips generally about making camp cooking or camp prep easier. So any other last things on your mind as we start to wind down this episode for camping cook prep and tips?
The best cooking gloves, particularly if you're doing off-season cooking. I actually really like the soft electrical gloves. They're you'll find them at Home Depot, Milwaukee hardware store. Milwaukee makes a great set, but there's a bunch of them out there, and they're just meant to keep cuts and stuff away. But they have a good texture to them. They do a decent job of heat for short periods of time. So if I am draining a pan or anything, I don't have to put on that, but they're still very dexterous. They're really easy to clean because they sort of have a nitrite layer to them. And then they do an okay job keeping your hands warm. So I almost always have sets all around the place. But yeah, that's my go-to cooking glove. And I think it's a lot better than disposables or the warm gloves that you use that end up getting sauce on them and they just don't work great. So that's one. The other big sort of tip or trick around cooking would be, and I think we already talked a little bit, is have things that you can go to easily and just pull from your freezer. So if you're making a big batch of sauce, put a serving or two servings of it in a Ziploc bag or in the right size jar, so that if you're showing up at camp and it's cold, it's raining, hey, all I have to do is warm this up and good to go.
How about then to end on your favorite easy meals to make? So when I was talking to your sister Alex about overlanding, she said her go-to is often ramen, just because it's such a great base dish, and then you can kind of sub in whatever extra fresh things you're able to find or whatever you're feeling that night. But it makes a really easy customizable template to build from. So I'm curious if there's something like that for you. What would that be?
I think I probably lean towards some sort of pasta. And so, pasta at its heart is really just take a protein, take some sort of sauce that pairs well with that protein, and then add absolutely anything you want to it. And that works in a pot and pan. It works on a scuttle. It works on whatever cooking device you're using, and is quick and delicious.
Nice. I thought you were going to go the Mexican route and say burritos or tacos, because that's another one that you like to play around with, and you can kind of endlessly customize based on season and ingredients and people's tastes.
Yeah. And I love fusioning with those. So chicken tikka masala burritos, or, I guess this isn't really a fusion, but just a breakfast burrito.
Yeah.
Lots of good options, lots of easy. That's one that's easy to cook ahead and freeze and then warm up. Yeah, I mean, there's just tons of good options. I would say take your favorite meal and figure out how to cook it outside. That's the biggest tip that I've got for you.
It's a good note to end on, I think. As you can probably tell, camp cooking is one of those topics where you can go on so many tangents and deep dives that it could cover a lot more than one episode. So this is definitely a topic I'll plan to revisit with future guests. If you have listened all the way to the end, thank you so much. Would love it if you left a like, comment, or follow on whatever podcast platform you're using. And if you've got any questions or comments, feel free to send them to me at BlueYonderGen at Instagram or Threads. I'm going to also link to any of the resources or the gear or the folks I mentioned learning from at Overland Expo, like Connie Rodman or Amanda Zito. A link to all of that information from our blueyonder-adventures.com podcast webpage. So if you're looking for those resources, that's where you can find more information, including the link to buy Amanda Zito's Motorcycle Camp Cookbook, which is pretty awesome. And I will see you again next week with a new episode. Thanks, everyone.